Yesterday, a tragedy occurred in Australia. And what happened was there was a mass shooting at a Hanukkah celebration. And the target was clearly religiously motivated and ideologically motivated. And what happened was two gunmen ended up shooting into a crowd at the celebration. They ended up killing 15 people. And one was even a child of 10 years old. It was a horrible tragedy. A horrible tragedy that happened. And yet, this was inevitable. Simply due to the policies that the Western nations have been instituting for years. For the last 4 years under Biden and under even earlier than that. Western nations have continually let in immigrants and people that do not assimilate and actively hate the U.S. You've seen this with this incident, with incidents in Germany. You've seen it with incidents in Sweden, which are being overrun by crime. You see it with the issues in Britain with the rape gangs and issues there. You've seen it with even the Somali immigrants in the U.S., which had ended up having a $1 to $2 billion fraud in Minnesota. We have actively seen groups of people. We have actively put in illegal immigrants and legal immigrants that are actively anti-U.S., actively hate our country, and don't assimilate. This is a massive issue, and this has caused tons of issues, and this right here, the shooting, is a direct result of it. And it's a direct result, and here's why. So both shooters were are Muslim and of the Islamic faith, and both pledged their allegiance to the Islamic State. In fact, in the article it says the attackers are both said to have pledged allegiance to the Islamic State group. Here is what we know about them. The Islamic State group is ISIS, even though it's framed a little bit different here. It's ISIS. And those are actively anti-U.S. They actively attack. In fact, just recently, they attacked 3 U.S. soldiers and ended up killing 3 in Syria. Yet we continue to let people in. Not just in Australia, not just in Europe, but even in the U.S. We continue to let people in that are anti-U.S. And that would not happen in the first place if we did not let people in without proper vetting and without proper vetting. And that's what happened in the U.S. In fact, let's read more about the shooters. So, Minister of Home Affairs Tony Burke confirmed that the relationship between 2 gunmen without naming them. Australian broadcaster ABC did name them as Navek Arkham, 24, who is under hospital police surveillance, and his father, Sajid Arkham, I don't know how to pronounce it, 50 years old. Burke indicated that his father held a permanent residency in Australia without giving his details of a nationality. Now, the fact that they didn't give his details means that he most likely was an immigrant, and he did end up coming there through immigration. But even then, this shouldn't have happened because they could have stopped him from coming in earlier. And additionally, the fact that they didn't say that he was Australian born, that means he did actually immigrate. Because if you look further down in the article, it said their son, he said, is an Australian born citizen. So he did come to Australia. He did come to Australia. And if you didn't let that person in, this wouldn't have happened. And it said the son was actually Australian born and 24 years old. So it's not just recently. This has been going on for years, and it's continuing to get worse. As you gotten even more members. You gotten, more recently, the massive Somali issue in Minnesota. Then you've gotten the massive amounts of immigrants to Europe. This has been an issue for a long time, but it's continuing to escalate, and we're actually seeing the long-term effects of it. In fact, there's actually been people saying, in fact, I think there was a study about this, that actually second generation is actually more extreme. So even though we're actually just now seeing the effects of what has been happening over the last 20 so years, and it's not good. It's not good for the U.S. It's nowhere near good for Europe, and it's not good for the Western world. And we need to reverse this somehow. Luckily, I think Trump is doing that. He's just not doing it enough. But we need to push it even more further. And the minister said he arrived here in the country on a student visa. Later in 2001, he transferred to a partner visa, subsequently obtained in the resident visas. So yeah, he came from overseas, and this is, if we didn't let people like this in, then we wouldn't be having this issue in the first place. Another thing is, the Sun first came to attention of the Australian intelligence agency ASIO in 2019. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has confirmed. So basically, he was already on a list. Already. And this is also an example of second generation being more extreme. Once again, it's the Sun that came on the radar first. So here's an example of second generation being more radical. He was examined on the basis of being associated with others, and the assessment was made that he had no indication of ongoing threat or threat that made him threat of him engaging in violence. That's clearly false. They knew about him, and they didn't stop him. If they would have just arrested him for calling for the killing of Jewish people, or even for threatening the Western world, this wouldn't have happened. This is an absolute failure on Australian intelligence agency. And it's an absolute failure on the Western world for not actually doing something about this person. I blame the government of Australia for this. I blame the policies that have been going on for years. I blame the gunmen. But who wouldn't be here without... they wouldn't be here without the negligence and willing participation of the Australian government. This is a massive issue, and it continues to be. And we need to get people in government that will actually start removing these people and start actually putting people in jail that are actively calling for threats of violence. Because if you threat for violence, that's not freedom of speech. If you have a threat for violence, that's not freedom of speech. You're not engaging in any political discussion. You are actively harming the political discussion too, as now you're threatening people, and that's causes people to be afraid of what you might do, and that causes people's ideas to not be heard in the public space. So, you do need to arrest people that are online, in person, that are threatening to kill other groups of people. That needs to be arrested. And I think that will actually end up solving a lot of these issues too. As then you'll put them in a box. They'll get away. And they won't actually be in society to cause these issues. Additionally, an even stronger connection to ISIS, it said 2 ISIS flags were found in the men's car at Bondi. Senior officials told ABC, speaking on the condition of anonymity. So again, this is even stronger connection. It wasn't just evidence that we don't know about, but here's actual evidence. Excuse me. Here's evidence that we actually do know about. And this is even one of the... And it's so clear that they were. So why didn't the Australian agency just arrest them, put them in jail? They don't seem to be... They should have just put them in jail. And they don't seem to be against suppressing speech, as they just passed a law that ended up restricting the internet, restricting X, YouTube, and a whole bunch of internet websites, but did not restrict Blue Sky. So they clearly aren't against suppressing speech and just suppressing political... and by the way, the ban was for under 16, so people over 16 can still do it. But They're clearly not against suppression of speech, as they are clearly biased by banning X, not Blue Sky. So, they're clearly not against it. But why do they continue to allow this kind of extremism when they should be arresting those people? And they should be. So they're clearly captured in some way. And what Australians need to do is just end up voting in someone that will actually deport all these people and deport them continually. And then also put someone into power that will actually arrest all these people. But I don't think they might do that. Sadly, I don't think they'll do that. Additionally, these attacks aren't even just in Australia. In 2015, there was an attack that killed 130 people. And then last year, one from ISIS that killed 145 in a Russian hall. These are just the bigger examples. There's going to be smaller examples out there that are out there. In fact, there was one recently that was also on the same day. There was an anti-Semitic chants and smoke bombs to disrupt a Hanukkah concert in Amsterdam. Again, this is in Europe. It's not just Australia. There's clearly a rise of anti-Semitism, and that is because people within the U.S., within the Western world, are not punishing people. They're calling for violence, calling for threats, calling for the killing of others, and they need to do that. If they call for death, then that's a violation of the law. In fact, it doesn't even fit under freedom of speech. In fact, there's laws against it currently. For example, if you threaten the president, you could be arrested. If you threaten anyone, you could be arrested. And that has to continue. And they have to do that. They actually have to enforce that. Sadly, they are not, and they need to be. And this violence will just get worse and worse and worse if they don't actually do that. They need to do it. They need to do it. Additionally, it's not just with this violence against Jewish people and the Jewish faith across the Western world due to the fact that we're letting people in that are incredibly extreme. Jewish people are now afraid. U.S. Jewish groups are urged heightened security at public events after Hanukkah attack in Australia. This is scary. People are threatened. People are scared. And that is actively suppressing the speech of Jewish people and what they believe in. And this is not okay. The U.S. and U.S. nations should arrest as many people that are threatening violence against conservatives, against Jewish people, against Christians, against people of the Islamic faith. As long as they're calling for violence, they need to be arrested. Then we should not allow anyone in that is actively against the U.S. As if you let those people in, you're more likely to get these attacks, more likely to get sleeper cells more likely to get people within the United States that are anti-U.S. and actively are against us and will end up doing something like this terrorist attack in Australia. They need to do as much as possible to suppress this. And they are not. We need to put someone in there that does. Trump was a step in the right direction in America. There's no one in Europe right now that's really in power that's doing this. We need someone more extreme. Someone that's willing to put these people in jail. Someone like Bukele in El Salvador. Someone like Bukele in El Salvador that is willing to arrest criminals. That is willing to put them in jail and keep them in jail. That will solve so many issues. Solve this issue. Solve the crime issue. And then and the deportation, we need that too. So we get people out of the country that are against us. These are the most basic things in keeping a secure state within the Western world. It's the most important thing for keeping the Western world secure. It's the most important thing. Another thing that's also a tragedy with this event in Australia is the fact that they don't have they have massive gun control. And gun control within Australia is extremely restricted. They don't have any. They have one of the most strict gun controls in any country in the world. Yeah, stuff like this happens, and it will continue to happen. If they would have actually had, if people in the crowd would have actually had a gun to stop them, it would have been so much better. In fact, it wasn't the police that ended up stopping one of the shooters. It was a hero that ended up stopping one of the shooters and stopping more violence from happening. So let's watch the video of him actually doing that.
Chris Minns has praised the actions of this civilian who tackled and disarmed one of the Bondi Beach shooters. The footage shows the man wearing a light-coloured T-shirt and black pants, crouching behind a parked vehicle near the gunman who is shooting the weapon. Just after the gunman fires, the man comes from behind, tackling him and wresting the weapon from his grasp.
That right there is a hero. But there would have been less carnage, though. The thing is, if you saw that, before he would end up tackling him, he fired off 2 or 3 more rounds. That's 2 or 3 more lives that could have been saved. If he actually had a gun and would have just shot him in the back. If Australia actually had more guns and actually had the right for self-defense, there would have been less carnage. Additionally, someone else that actually could have had a gun in the crowd would have used that gun to actually shoot him first. That is another thing with this tragic situation, is that if Australia had more people there with guns, the shooters wouldn't have been able to shoot off as many rounds as they did. Wouldn't have been able to kill as many people as they did. That's tragic, but good for this hero. We need more people like this that are willing to stand up and fight in this situation. Good for this hero. This is what we need. Heroes like this. Sadly, I don't think you need more you need less gun control here. Additionally, if someone else in the crowd actually had a gun, there'd be more likely to be heroes like this too, because more people would have the courage to fight up because they actually have something to fight back with. They actually have a weapon to fight back with. We would have more people standing up. But that's not happening anymore. Simply because they have so much gun control there. And it's like this wouldn't happen in... it wouldn't be as bad. It's a preventative measure, but it wouldn't have been as bad. Also, with that, the police wouldn't... with the situation here, it took a minute for the police to respond, right? If they had someone in the crowd that actually had a weapon to start with, the police wouldn't have been... the threat could possibly be neutralized before the police even came there. That is the benefit of having guns accessible in your nation, and having people that are actively good that have a gun to stop the bad people. What stops a bad person with a gun? It's a good person with a gun. That is the police. In this situation, someone here, he uses weapons, his hands, but he stopped him there. You need less gun control here. It would have made it so much better. But congratulations to the hero. This hero, celebrated. This is an absolute hero here. Because it could have been so much worse. They could have shot even more into the crowd if it didn't get stopped in time. And congratulations to the hero. You stopped so much more violence. You stopped more death. And we need people like this. Luckily, I think we actually start to have... We are having more people like this. You're having more people that are willing to stand up. Because you see what happened after Charlie Kirk. More people are willing to stand up for what they believe in and willing to stand up against injustice. You see it with the rising wave of conservatism. You see it with the rising amount of people... you see it with the Trump's win. You saw it with the AFD's rising poll numbers in... Germany. You've seen it with the situation that happened after X was fined $140 million. You saw it become the most downloaded app in every Play Store in every European country. People are starting to stand up. People are starting to fight against injustice, fight against violence, and actually start to stand up against policies that are actively harming people in this nation. Be it standing up against gun control, standing up against immigration, standing up against the violence and supporting arresting and removing all of these people that are actively calling for threats and violence. Things might be scary right now, but we are seeing a good sign that people are actually starting to stand up and get tired of this, even though it's getting worse for the moment. You've seen good signs. People willing to stand up, people willing to change and actually start fighting the craziness that's going on with this. And hopefully in the future, we get those policies, less gun control, the more deportations, more more arresting of violent people that continue to threaten groups of people with violence, with active death threats. We continue to see people that will fight against those. Just like this person ended up fighting against the violence here, we as people need to end up standing up against the violence in the future and support policies that will end up stopping this. And I see a good signs in the future that will happen. And that's where I'm going to leave it off, on a positive note. A positive note for the future that we can actually change this. People are starting to change. People are starting to realize that we can change this and move for the better.